Hey guys, today I bring you an incredible and moving story. Let's hear the story of Axton Harrington, a furniture restorer from Asheville, who had a transformative near-death experience and returned with a special mission to share with us. This story brings spiritual revelations and makes us reflect on the future and the true purpose of life. Before we start, leave in the comments which city you are watching, and, if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any content. Let's go on this spiritual journey together. My name is Axton Harrington, and before I share the experience that completely changed my life, I need to properly introduce myself. I'm a furniture restorer in Asheville, North Carolina, a town that looks like it was hand-painted among the Blue Ridge Mountains. Every morning, when I open the windows in my workshop, I am greeted by the scent of pine trees and the sound of birds that nest in the centuries-old oak trees in the backyard. My workshop is in an old warehouse that belonged to my grandfather. It's a place that tells stories in every floorboard, every exposed ceiling beam. Tools hanging on the walls are like old friends. Each has its own specific place. Each carries memories of past projects. The smell of fresh sawdust mixes with the aroma of beeswax and varnish, creating that unique atmosphere that every craftsman knows well. Axton, you're the most methodical person I know. My sister Ella always says when she visits me at the workshop. Every tool in its place, every piece of wood cataloged. How can someone be so organized with material things and so disorganized with spiritual matters? She's not wrong. I've always been like this, precise, methodical, down to earth. When a customer brings me an antique piece, I can see beyond the scratches and marks of time. I can see the story behind each imperfection. Imagine the hands that sculpted each detail. But when did Ella start with her talks about energy, meditation, and the afterlife? Well, then I would just hang up. You need to open your mind, brother, she would tell me during our Sunday lunches. There is a whole universe beyond what our eyes can see. Ella, darling, I would reply with a somewhat ironic smile. The only universe that interests me is this one, where I can feel the texture of the wood beneath my fingers and transform broken furniture into works of art. I remember one particular afternoon a few weeks before the event that would change everything. Ella had brought a book about near-death experiences to the workshop. I was working on an old Victorian desk, focused on repairing a particularly delicate drawer. "Check this out, Ax," she said, sitting on a high stool near my workbench. "This man describes exactly what it's like to be on the other side. The light, the peace, the encounters." "Ella," I interrupted, blowing some sawdust off the surface of the wood, "don't you think these people simply had hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen in the brain? There's a scientific explanation for all of this." She closed the book with a resigned sigh. "Do you know what your problem is, brother? You're so worried about fixing broken things that you forgot to take care of what's broken inside of you." At the time, I laughed at that comment. Ella has always had this mystical side, this poetic way of seeing things. While I was busy restoring antique furniture, she spent her days teaching yoga classes and organizing meditation groups. We were so different that sometimes people doubted whether we were really brothers. I'm 42 now, and if you told me a few years ago that I'd be here, telling a story about a near-death experience, I probably would have laughed that disbelieving laugh I used to give to Ella's theories. My world was solid, tangible, predictable. I liked it that way. I wake up early, work with my hands, solve concrete problems. That was my life, and I was perfectly satisfied with it. But you know that saying that says that life is what happens while we make other plans. Well, in my case, death, or near death, is what happened while I was planning to continue my perfectly normal life as a furniture restorer in Asheville. And that experience, well, it changed everything. Not outwardly, I'm still the same man working with wood and restoration, but inwardly, I'm a completely different person. Sometimes we need to be broken to be restored, Ella told me after it all happened. And for the first time, I understood exactly what she meant. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those mornings that only the Blue Ridge Mountains know how to create. Mist slipped between the valleys like a river of cotton, enveloping the trees in an ethereal embrace. Autumn had already begun to paint the leaves with shades of red and gold, creating an impressionistic canvas on the mountainous landscape. I woke up before the alarm went off, at 5:30 in the morning. I had an important mission that day, to look for a Victorian chest of drawers from a remote property, about a 2-hour drive away. The owner, Mr. Thompson, had sent me photos the day before. It was an extraordinary piece from 1860, with delicate carvings and original bronze hardware. It's a family heirloom, he had explained to me on the phone. My grandmother used to keep her best clothes in it. Now it's a little dilapidated, but I imagine you can restore it to its former splendor. While preparing my usual breakfast, toast with butter and strong black coffee, I received a text from Ella. Ax, I had a strange dream about you last night. How about we postpone that trip? I quickly responded. Ella, you and your feelings. It's just a routine trip. I've done this hundreds of times. The phone rang almost instantly. It was her, of course. Axton, please listen to me. His voice was strained on the other end of the line. I know you don't believe in these things, but the dream was so real. There was fog, a lot of fog, and then, Ella, I interrupted, trying to sound patient. Of course there was fog in your dream. It's October in the Blue Ridge Mountains. There's fog every morning. Look, I need to hang up. I still have to organize my tools for the trip. I heard her worried sigh. Will you at least promise to drive extra carefully today? I promise, little sister. And when I get back, I'll show you the prettiest dresser you've ever seen. Maybe I'll even let you keep your healing crystals in it, I joked, trying to ease her worry. Don't joke about it, Ax, she replied seriously. Just be careful, okay? I finished my coffee thinking about the conversation with Ella. My sister has always had these our feelings, gone since we were children. Most of the time, nothing came of it. But there were times I shook my head, pushing those thoughts away. I had work to do. I loaded my box of special tools into the trunk of my car, a 2019 Ford Mustang I had recently purchased, my little gift to myself after a particularly good year in business. I turned on the radio, tuning into my favorite country music station. Johnny Cash started singing A Ring of Fire, and I smiled, humming along as I maneuvered out of the garage. The road was especially foggy that morning. Visibility was no more than a few meters ahead, and the car's headlights created an almost hypnotic effect in the dense fog. The GPS indicated that there were around 40 minutes left to reach the destination, and I proceeded cautiously, respecting each winding curve of the mountainous road. Maybe I should have listened to Ella, I thought out loud, realizing that the fog was getting thicker and thicker, but it was more than halfway there, and Mr. Thompson was waiting. Besides, what harm could happen? It was at that exact moment that it happened. An immense brown figure appeared out of nowhere, materialized from the mist like a ghost. It was a majestic deer, its eyes reflecting the headlights like two polished copper coins. The animal seemed as surprised as I was, frozen in the middle of the road. Everything happened in a fraction of a second, but in my memory, every moment was recorded in slow motion. The sudden turn of the steering wheel to the right, trying to avoid a collision. The sound of tires skidding on damp asphalt, a sharp squeak that seemed to pierce the morning silence, the moment of disorientation when the car started to spin. I remember thinking about Ella, how she would say, "I told you so," if she knew I was having an accident. Then came the first impact. The car rolled over, and I felt the seatbelt tighten against my chest. There was a crack, the sound of tearing metal, and suddenly I found myself being thrown from the vehicle. The world spun around me in a whirlwind of colors. The gray of the fog, the green of the trees, the red of my car. For a brief moment, I had the strange sensation of floating, as if gravity had decided to take a break. So this is how it all ends, I thought, with surprising clarity. The last sound I registered was the screeching of metal against the trees, and then silence, a deep and absolute silence that seemed to swallow everything around it. Darkness came soon after, not like something scary, but like a soft blanket that enveloped me, taking away all the pain and fear. The last thing that crossed my mind before I lost consciousness was Ella's voice. There are things beyond what our eyes can see, Ax. How ironic it was that I was about to find out exactly what she meant by that. The transition from normal consciousness to this new state was the most extraordinary experience I have ever had. One moment I was in the middle of the accident, feeling the impact, the fear, the confusion, and the next, absolute calm enveloped me like a warm blanket on a cold day. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not an ordinary silence, the kind we experience on a daily basis, but a living, vibrant, almost palpable silence. It was as if all the noise in the world had been filtered out, leaving only a deep, comforting peace. Then I realized I was floating above the accident scene. There was no fear, no confusion, just a calm curiosity. as if watching an interesting movie. I saw my body below, lying on the side of the road like a puppet whose strings had been cut. A small crowd was beginning to form around it. A truck driver, a burly man in a faded red cap, was the first to stop. I saw him running towards my body, cell phone already in his hand. 911. We have a serious accident on Blue Ridge Highway, milepost 47. Yes, a man was thrown from the vehicle. No, I'm not sure if he's breathing. Please come quickly. It was fascinating to observe how different his voice sounded from that height, as if it were coming through several layers of water, distant and at the same time perfectly understandable. A gray-haired lady got out of her car holding a plaid blanket. "Dear God," she murmured as she approached my body. "Are you still breathing? Is anyone here a doctor?" A young man in his early 20s began directing traffic, waving at cars to slow down. "Slow down, guys. We have an emergency here." His hands shook slightly as he made the gestures. The most surreal thing was how I could notice everything simultaneously. Every expression, every movement, every worried whisper. It was like having several pairs of eyes, all working at the same time, taking in every detail of the scene as it unfolded. "Your pulse is weak, but it's there," I heard someone say. A woman in blue scrubs, probably a nurse on her way to work, had knelt beside my body. "No one move him. There could be spinal injury." As I watched, I began to notice something even more extraordinary. I could see not only people's physical actions, but also something like energy fields around them, soft colors that pulsed and changed according to your emotions. The nurse was enveloped in calm, steady blue, while the truck driver emanated a nervous, agitated orange. Ella was right all along, I thought, with a kind of distant amusement. All those conversations about auras and energies that I had dismissed as nonsense, there they were, as real and visible as the asphalt of the road. I tried to move and found that all I had to do was think to change my position. There was no weight. There was no resistance. It was like being pure thought. I floated a little higher, watching the sirens approach in the distance. Their sound was curiously musical from that perspective, as if part of a larger symphony that I had never noticed before. One of the paramedics who arrived with the ambulance reminded me a lot of Ella. She had the same kind of calm, determined energy. As she worked on my body, I could hear her soft voice speaking to me, although my physical ears were obviously unable to register any sound. "Stay with us, friend. It's not your time yet." The strangest thing was that I didn't feel any urgency to stay. There was no fear of death. There was no desperate attachment to life. It was as if, for the first time, I understood that existence was much bigger than that broken body on the road. I watched as they loaded me into the ambulance, the paramedics working efficiently, exchanging medical terms that, from this elevated perspective, seemed strangely limited in describing what was really happening. How do I explain that while they were fighting to keep my body alive, I was experiencing the purest form of life I had ever known? And then, as the ambulance drove away, its sirens cutting through the morning fog, I began to notice something new. A light, unlike anything I had ever seen, began to attract my attention. But that's another part of the story. You're never really prepared for this, I thought, remembering Ella's words about spiritual experiences. But maybe that's exactly how it should be. How to describe the indescribable. How to put into words something that transcends language itself. Even today, years later, when I close my eyes and try to relive that moment, words seem small, inadequate to capture the true essence of what I experienced. At first, it was just a point of light in the distance, like a lone star in a dark sky. But calling it light is like calling the ocean water, technically correct, but completely inadequate to describe its true nature. This light, it was alive. It pulsed, breathed, sang. I remember one day, not long before the accident, when Ella tried to explain to me about different dimensions of existence. "Ax, imagine that you spend your whole life seeing only in black and white," she said, "and suddenly your eyes open to all the colors of the rainbow at once. It would be overwhelming, wouldn't it?" I shrugged it off at the time, busy restoring an old dining table. "Ella, you and your metaphors," I replied absently. But now, floating in that space between worlds, I finally understood what she meant. The light I saw didn't have a specific color. It had all of them, and even more that my human brain didn't even know existed. As the light approached, or I approached it, The notions of space and movement were completely different there. I started to hear music, not with my ears, of course, but with every particle of my being. It was as if the entire universe was one grand symphony, and I was finally hearing all the parts at once. It's like that time I restored an old piano, I thought, remembering a specific project. When I finished and the pianist came to test, it was magical to see how all those separate pieces came together to create music. But this is infinitely more complex and harmonious. The feeling of peace that emanated from the light was indescribable. Imagine the best moment of your life, that perfect hug, that feeling of complete fulfillment, that moment of pure love, and multiply it by infinity. Still, you will only come close to what I felt. I remembered all the times Ella had tried to make me meditate. You need to quiet your mind, Ax, she always said. There is a peace beyond understanding waiting for you. I don't have time for that, I used to respond. I have furniture to restore, bills to pay, a real life to live. How ironic that now, in what could be considered the most traumatic time of my life, I was experiencing exactly the peace she always talked about. It was as if every worry, every fear, every anxiety just dissolved. The light began to show different facets, like a slowly rotating celestial diamond. Each face revealed a different aspect of existence. In one, I saw all the love I had ever experienced in my life, from my mother's first hug to a satisfied customer's last smile. In another, I saw all the possibilities I had never explored, paths not taken, choices not made. It's like restoring an old piece, I thought, using metaphors from my work again to try to understand what was happening. You start by removing layers and layers of old varnish, and each one reveals something new about the history of the piece. The light seemed to respond to my thoughts, pulsing differently with each new understanding. There was no judgment, no demands, just pure and total acceptance. It was as if she was saying, "Yes, you got it, keep going." At one point, I realized I was crying, but not physical tears. It was a cry of the soul, a deep recognition of something that had always been there, but that I had never been able to see. How could I have been blind to this for so long? I thought. How could I doubt everything Ella said? The light seemed to surround this thought with even more love, as if saying that every moment of doubt was also part of the path, that every question had its purpose. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any brighter, the light began to take on a more defined shape. A presence began to manifest within her, Oren. But this is the next part of the story. Some truths, as Ella always said, can only be understood when we are ready for them. And in that moment, floating in the embrace of that transcendental light, I was finally ready. How to explain Oren? It's like trying to describe the color to someone who's never seen it. Imagine someone made entirely of light, but not a light that hurts your eyes, a light that caresses your soul. It was as if the very essence of love and wisdom had taken shape. The first time I noticed his presence was gradual, like dawn. He didn't appear all of a sudden. It was more like he was always there, and I was the one who became able to notice him. It was like when I restore an antique piece of furniture, and slowly the original beauty begins to emerge beneath layers of dirt and old varnish. "Welcome, Axton," were the first words I received, but they weren't words in the ordinary sense. It was more as if the very thought of him materialized within my consciousness. The sensation was of a hug that involved not only my being, but every moment of my existence. I remember a conversation with Ella, weeks before the accident. She was reading a book about angels and spirit guides. "Ax, have you ever stopped to think that there might be someone watching you, guiding you?" "Of course, Ella," I replied at the time, laughing as I sanded an antique chair. "The only guide I have is my common sense and 40 years of experience with woodworking." Now, in Oren's presence, that conversation came back to me with surprising clarity. It was as if every moment of doubt, every skeptical joke I ever made was illuminated by new understanding. "Your doubts were part of the way," Oren communicated, and I could feel a faint hint of amusement in his presence, like a patient teacher with a student who finally understands a difficult lesson. Every question you asked had a purpose. It was fascinating how Oren could convey complex concepts in fractions of a second. Every word of his was loaded with layers and layers of meaning. It was like opening a book and absorbing its entire contents instantly, not just the words, but all the emotions and experiences contained within. "You have a lot of questions," he continued, and I could feel waves of understanding emanating from him. It was true. I had thousands of questions bubbling in my consciousness. About life, about death, about the purpose of everything. Why now? I managed to formulate mentally. Why me? The answer came not in words, but in sensations and images. I saw my entire life unfolding like an intricately woven carpet. Every moment, every choice, every encounter, everything had its place and purpose in the larger pattern. Remember that 18th century table you restored last year? Oren asked, accessing my memories with an intimacy that should have scared me but felt perfectly natural. How did you know it was the right time to start the work? The memory came clear to my mind. A beautiful but severely damaged table. I had waited months before beginning the restoration, feeling I needed the right knowledge and experience to do the piece justice. Some restorations, Oren continued, require the piece to wait for the right time, the right restorer, the right conditions. Your soul is like that table. This is the right time for your restoration. The analogy touched me deeply. Oren was using my own craft to make me understand complex spiritual truths. It was as if he spoke my language, translating the incomprehensible into terms I could understand. But I still have so much to learn, I protested, suddenly feeling very small in the face of the vastness of knowledge he represented. A wave of unconditional love enveloped me. Axton, he conveyed, you've spent your life restoring physical objects. Now it's time to understand that there are other types of restoration. Every piece you've brought back to life has been training for this moment. Images of all the furniture I've ever restored flashed through my mind. Every chair repaired, every table renewed, every detail carefully preserved. But now he saw something more. He saw how each restoration had affected not just the objects, but the people connected to them. I saw the joy in the customers' eyes, the memories preserved, the stories continued. You see, Oren pointed out, you were never just a restorer of furniture. You are a restorer of stories, of memories, of connections, and now, you are ready to understand restoration on a deeper level. I felt tears, not physical, but of the soul, as understanding flooded me. My entire life had been a preparation for this moment, each restored piece a step on the path to greater understanding. There is more, Oren said softly, so much more for you to see and understand. And then he began to show me truths that would completely transform my understanding of reality. But this is the next part of the story. It's difficult to put what happened later in chronological order, because time didn't work there as we know it. It was as if past, present, and future were pages of a book that we could freely leaf through, stopping to examine each detail with surprising clarity. Watch, Oren guided me, and suddenly I was seeing reality like never before. It was as if the very fabric of the universe unfolded before me, showing how everything is interconnected in complex and beautiful patterns. Remember that Art Deco sideboard you restored last month? Oren asked, accessing my memories. Yes, I replied mentally. A unique piece from the 1920s, with rosewood marquetry. Show me how you worked on it, Oren asked. In my mind, I saw myself working on the sideboard, first, examining every detail, every mark, every imperfection, then, carefully removing layers of old varnish to reveal the original beauty of the wood. Now, Oren continued, notice how reality works in a similar way. And then I saw it. I saw how every action, every thought, every moment left a mark on the fabric of reality, like rings on a tree trunk. I saw how the choices we make create patterns, like waves that expand infinitely. See that decision you made 15 years ago? Oren pointed out. And I found myself deciding to help a stranger with a flat tire on a rainy night. Look at what she caused. Like a movie speeding up, I saw how that act of kindness had consequences I never imagined. The man I helped arrived in time for an important interview, got the job, changed the lives of dozens of people through his work, who in turn affected hundreds of others. It's like grain in wood, I commented, resorting again to the metaphors of my craft. Each line tells a story, connects with others. Exactly, Oren replied, and I felt his delight at my understanding. Now look deeper. My vision expanded, and I began to see beyond physical actions. I saw energy fields that connected everything and everyone, pulsing with a life of their own. It was like seeing millions of spiderwebs made of light, each vibrating at its own frequency, but all part of a larger pattern. Ella tried to explain this to me. I thought, remembering the countless times my sister talked about energy and universal connections. Yes, Oren confirmed. She sees fragments of this reality. Many humans do, but few can fully integrate this understanding into their everyday lives. Then Oren showed me something even more surprising. I saw how Earth's religions and spiritual systems were like different maps trying to describe the same territory. Each captured a part of the truth, but none could encompass the entirety. It's like when different artisans restore the same piece, Oren explained, again using analogies I could understand. Each person has their own technique, their favorite tools, their unique approach. In the end, everyone seeks the same goal, to reveal the original beauty. I have seen moments in human history where these truths were discovered and then lost, distorted, misinterpreted. I have seen how leaders and institutions over the centuries have taken fragments of this wisdom and shaped them to serve their own purposes. But why show me all this? I asked. Because you are a restorer, Oren replied. You understand the value of preserving what is authentic, of removing layers of distortion to reveal the original truth. This knowledge is not new to you. It is just in a different context. Then he showed me how each person carries a spark of this truth within them, even if they don't realize it. I saw how each soul is like a unique piece of antique furniture, some well-preserved, others in need of restoration, but all equally valuable. You see, Oren continued, your entire life has been training. Every piece you've restored has taught you about patience, about seeing beyond the surface, about respecting the history and essence of everything. The revelations kept coming, each one deeper than the last. It was as if each truth was a door that opened to 10 others, and each understanding led to new levels of understanding. There's more, Oren said softly. So much more. Are you ready to see what's coming? And so, he began to show me visions of the future that would forever change my understanding of humanity's destiny. But that's another part of the story. What do you see when you look at a damaged ancient piece? Oren asked me, before starting to reveal visions of the future. I see your potential, I responded instinctively. I see what she can be, beyond what she is at the moment. Exactly. Oren's presence radiated approval. Now, let us look at the future of humanity in the same way. What followed was like watching 1,000 films simultaneously, each perfectly understandable each showing different possibilities of what was to come. It was overwhelming and, at the same time, strangely familiar, like examining the different grains in a piece of wood, seeing how each followed its own path but were all part of the same whole. First, Oren directed, look at what's closest. I saw the next few years unfolding like pages of a book being turned by the wind. I saw climate change intensifying, not as a punishment, Oren showed me, but as a natural process of rebalancing the planet. I saw droughts in places that had always been fertile, floods in regions that had always been dry. It's like when an old piece needs to go through a difficult restoration process, Oren explained, again using analogies I could understand. Sometimes, you have to completely peel off the old varnish, leaving the wood bare, exposed, before it can be properly restored. I saw social tensions rising in various parts of the world, people dividing, communities fragmenting, like cracks in old wood, I thought. Yes, Oren confirmed, but watch what happens next. And then I saw something extraordinary. I saw how these very divisions would eventually force people to find new paths of unity, like a broken piece that, when repaired using Japanese kintsugi techniques, becomes more beautiful precisely because of its cracks. Now, look further, Oren guided me. The visions expanded to a more distant future. I saw impressive technological advances, machines that could cure diseases that we now consider incurable, forms of energy that did not harm the planet, new means of communication that transcended language barriers. But what was most fascinating wasn't the technology itself. It was how it served as a catalyst for a deeper transformation of human consciousness. It's like that time I used a new restoration technique on an old piece, I commented. Technique was important, but the real miracle was how it allowed the original beauty of the piece to come through. Exactly, Oren replied. Technology is just a tool. True progress happens in consciousness. I saw waves of spiritual awakening sweeping the planet, not as a new religion, but as a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. I saw people rediscovering old wisdom, but now with a new perspective, a new maturity. But there will be challenges, Oren showed. I saw periods of confusion and chaos. I saw resistance to change. I saw those who would desperately cling to old paradigms. Like clients who resist when I suggest a deeper restoration, I observed. Yes, Oren confirmed. Fear of change is natural. But watch what happens when people finally allow transformation. The visions showed how, after periods of turmoil, a new form of society would emerge. I saw communities reorganizing themselves in more harmonious ways. I saw a new relationship with the planet developing. I saw humanity finally beginning to understand its true potential. But it's not fixed, is it? I asked, noticing how the visions seemed fluid, changeable. As you know, a restoration never follows exactly the initial plan, Oren replied. The future is like a living piece of wood. It responds to touch, adapts, evolves. What's important is the general direction, the potential for transformation. The last visions were the most impactful. They showed a humanity that had finally found balance between technology and spirituality, between progress and preservation, between individuality and unity. Is it possible? I asked, marveling at the beauty of that potential future. As possible as turning an old, damaged piece into something beautiful again, Oren replied. It requires work, patience, dedication, and most importantly, faith in the process. As the visions began to dissipate, I realized there were tears, not physical, but of the soul, flowing. There was so much beauty, so much hope, even in the midst of the challenges that would come. There's more, Oren said softly. But first, I need to show you something about your own role in this process. The moment of return was a mix of feelings. Part of me wanted to stay in that state of infinite peace and understanding, but there was also a deep understanding that it wasn't my time yet. Oren explained to me that I had more to accomplish on the physical plane. The return to the body was intense. Suddenly, all the weight of physical existence returned. The pain, the body's limitations, everything seemed denser and heavier. I woke up in the hospital ICU, with my sister Ella by my side. The doctor said I had been in a coma for 3 days. After the experience, and my life changed completely. Not in the outward sense, I'm still the same furniture restorer in Asheville, but my way of seeing the world and life is totally different. That skepticism I had about spirituality turned into a deep understanding that there is so much more to existence than we can see or touch. My relationship with Ella also changed. Now I can better understand everything she tried to explain to me about spirituality. Our conversations became deeper and more meaningful. Today, 5 years after this experience, I still process everything that happened. I have not become some spiritual guru, nor do I intend to be. I'm still just a furniture restorer who had an extraordinary experience. When people ask me about it, I share my story honestly, without trying to convince anyone. The biggest change was internal. I learned that death is not something to be feared, but a transition into something much greater that our human minds can barely comprehend. And although I continue to live a normal life, I carry with me the certainty that there is something much deeper and more meaningful beyond this reality as we know it.